Welcome, everyone. This is Work of the Heart, Reconnecting to Prayer with Miss Rachael Gelfman Schultz, another offering in Drushas Falls-Mont. It's a pleasure to see everyone here today. This class on tefillah is ongoing and looking on how it is often a struggle to connect the words and experience of tefillah. In this course, we will take a closer look at different services, sections, passages, and words of prayer in order to better understand how one can contribute to our experience of prayer. We've had the pleasure of learning for these past couple of weeks with Rachael Schultz. And one note of housekeeping, I am going to send invitations to panelists to people in the attendee room in Zoom. This will make it so that you can unmute yourself, ask questions directly. If you're in a position where you're able to do it, I strongly encourage it, especially turning on your cameras. All I ask is to please keep yourself muted if you aren't actively speaking, because we can hear your mic and your background noises. If you want to ask questions, you're always welcome to do so in chat, whether that's on Facebook or on Zoom, and I will bring the questions to Rachel's attention. If you are an attendee on Zoom who doesn't want to be a panelist but wants to speak up directly, use the chat or the little raise hand function, and I will make sure you get unmuted. Source sheets will be shared in chat shortly. And with that, I want to hand things over to Rachael Schultz.
Thanks, Kayla. I want to dedicate this class in the memory of Shaked Dahan, who was the son of my son's swim teacher. And I don't know if you saw this in the news, but there were 3 soldiers that were basically that they didn't know what happened to them, that were missing until now. And they just found out that they were actually all killed on October 7th, but their bodies are in the hands of Hamas. So he's one of those, and his family. Even though the rabbi said, like the Rabbanut said that they could sit Shiva, his family decided they don't want to sit Shiva until they have his body back, or his mother decided that. So, yeah, so in his memory, 19-year-old soldier. Yeah. So last week, the last few weeks really, we've been looking at different metaphors for the relationship between God and people, and specifically in prayer. We looked at the lover metaphor and at the end of class, and the partner metaphor, and the king or master servant metaphor. And those are all sort of different ways also that we describe God, right? Words that we use to describe God. So this week, we're going to look at the first paragraph of the Amidah, and which contains a number of descriptions of God. And we're going to look at the larger question that we're going to look at is, like, what do we do when descriptions of God that are in the set text of the prayers do not sort of resonate with our personal experiences? That's sort of the larger question. So I want to start just by looking at the first paragraph, reading it together. And the question I want you to have in mind, and after we finish reading it, we can share, is sort of which of these descriptions given in this paragraph resonate with you, and why, or opposite, don't resonate with you. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, yeah, everyone see it? Yes, good. Okay, does someone want to read just the first paragraph of the Amidah? Right, last week we looked, for those of you who weren't there, which is a lot of people since it was Thanksgiving, we looked at the last blessing after the Shema and before the Amidah, which is the blessing of redemption. So now we're moving on from the blessing of redemption to the Shema itself. Yeah, so does someone want to read the first paragraph? Yeah, Ellen, go ahead.
I'll read if you want.
Oh, okay.
Oh, Nancy, did Ellen say she wanted to? I didn't.
Sure.
Blessed are you, Hashem, our God and God of our fathers, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God, most high almighty, who bestows beneficent kindness, who possesses everything, who remembers the piety of the patriarchs, who brings a redeemer to their children's children for the sake of his name with love. King, helper, and deliverer, and shield, blessed are you, Hashem, shield of Abraham.
Okay. Yes, anything, and a lot of these descriptions obviously come up a lot in prayer, and we've looked at some of them before, but anything that jumps out of you is something that either resonates or doesn't resonate with these descriptive words for God.
I'm embarrassed to say what an amazing question that is. For a very long time, I've thought about all of the English translations that don't, and all the metaphors that don't work for me. And I have not spent a minute before now thinking about what would work for me. Maybe I just integrated the lesson of you can't capture God in words a little bit too well. I don't know.
Well, okay, first of all, that's a very important point. You can't capture God in words. Hold that, and it's going to be relevant actually to the next source. But it could go either way. I'm asking both ways. In other words, if there's a word that particularly doesn't resonate with you, you're also welcome to share and tell me why, because actually we're going to be talking about that more than words that do resonate. I mean, what do you if there's a word that particularly is, doesn't resonate with you or your personal experience, you're also welcome to share in either direction. So, but yes, the point of that it's impossible to describe God is a very good point that we will talk about in the next source. Yeah, Dad.
So the Kone HaKol, who possesses everything. So first of all, I should say I don't, it's used a little differently than I'm familiar with in modern Hebrew, sort of as the possession here. Mm-hmm. But I particularly like not so much that God possesses things, but the implication of that, which is that we don't. That everything we have is our ownership is transient, that our possession is transient, that there's a certain amount of we shouldn't be too possessive because it's not really ours. It's borrowed. Especially here we are in a time when we're seeing souls or nefashot are borrowed, right, and have to be returned. So never mind material possessions. So that's that has its meaning to me. I'm not sure if that's what the intention is.
Yeah, and first of all, that's beautiful. But I was actually surprised by that translation, but I didn't research it enough to know. I would think that it means that create everything. Sometimes that word can also mean create in certain contexts, but let's go with their translation. It's a beautiful idea. And we see that also, right? Yeah, what you said reminds me once of Shemitah also, right? The Shemitah year, right? The lesson in the Shemitah year is that we don't really have ownership in any sort of absolute way. Yeah, Nancy, was that you?
No, it was Fernanda.
Rachael.
Yeah, Rachael. Hi. So I just want to mention one thing, because I actually have I'm looking for translations all the time, and I have Portuguese and Spanish and Italian. So just so you know, both in my Portuguese Siddur, which I have two, and my Spanish one, they do say, what is the word here? Blah, 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 that possesses everything.
Okay, so let's go with that one then.
I don't know.
Yeah, okay, let's go with that then. And I like the meaning that my father described. So So we'll go with, yeah, that translation. Thank you. Thanks, Rachael. Anyone else? What other words here either resonate or do not resonate with people's experiences? You're welcome to also write it in the chat. I know, Ellen, where's Ellen? You had mentioned before king, not right? We discussed that not resonating with your experience, right? Do you want to add anything to that? Yeah, why?
Well, but father or parent doesn't really either. In some ways, teacher would, but not teacher. Teacher's kind of too mundane and too too close. You know, any part of the problem is any word that I'm familiar with that I would use, it would need to be like 10 times what the word means in real life.
Right. And here we see the king metaphor. We don't see, we don't see the father metaphor here, though obviously that does appear. You know, father, parent does appear elsewhere. Teacher is a very interesting one, which does not appear here. I'm not sure that I can think of an example in prayer. Maybe, I guess in the blessing before the Shema, God is a teacher in some ways. It's an interesting one. Okay. Yeah, Mom?
I like the idea of helper. You actually had an interesting discussion in my class I teach about gratitude, and somebody was saying, I don't know, they couldn't believe that gratitude was so effective. And somebody else said, that's because you're an agnostic. In other words, if you had faith in God, perhaps, you know, you would have more gratitude, or it would help you in your life if you had faith in God. So I thought that was an interesting discussion.
Very interesting. Yeah. So you feel like seeing God as a helper sort of inculcates gratitude in us. Seeing God as our helper or something. Yeah, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, or just the faith in God helps you to like see, maybe have gratitude for other people, because you see, it helps you see the good in other people, or in the world, or nature, or whatever.
But you said particularly like the helper metaphor, so like, so that seeing God as a helper also helps us see other people as helper. I mean, we've talked about that other times, right? That sometimes when we learn, like if we see God in a certain way, and that we can also learn from our relationship with God to interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, I actually, sorry, did I interrupt? But I actually have another, my English, one of my English translations says for the last sentence, King, helper, savior, and protector, blessed out Lord, protector of Abraham. So it's King, helper, savior, and protector. And it says nothing about shield. It just says protector of Abraham.
Right. They're just translating the, like, I think the word literally means more shield, but the point of a shield is that it's a protector.
Exactly. Yeah.
So they're sort of, translating it a bit less literally. Moshiach, I guess, could go either way. Meaning savior, deliverer. It's fairly similar. Yeah. Anything else? Any other? Yeah, Nancy.
This has always struck me as interesting, and this isn't the only place that we've seen it, is that because of our forefathers, or that we almost get a free pass of our behavior, and it's all about what God is doing for us today, because of what he's
2,000 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, when do we start having responsibility for our own behavior? It's always struck me as interesting.
Nancy, I like what you said, but I feel the opposite though. I feel like that we have so much more responsibility because we're so far behind from where our forefathers were, that we have so much more work to do. I feel actually the opposite. I'm not sure
We
if I
don't get it
understood.
free. We have to look at them as our models.
Yeah,
models.
Oh,
well,
for
that's
sure,
that's
for
like a
sure.
big.
But I'm thinking, but there are people who, think that they're protected because of this,
Right.
idea of
Right.
that
It can go
God's
in,
behaving.
right. It can go in
uh,
either way, really.
It can
Right.
go
I mean,
either way,
here,
yeah.
who
I always
remembers?
found it interesting.
Yeah, right. I mean, here, who remembers the piety of the patriarchs is more about what you're saying, like that in the merit of our patriarchs, that God should be kind to us. But we also see, and we're going to get to that hopefully also toward the end of class, Rachael is talking about our patriarchs as role models, patriarchs and matriarchs, but here it's patriarchs, right? Because that's also how the blessing starts. Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, and God of our fathers, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob. In other words, each time the God is repeated, the word God is repeated. God, not just our God and God of our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but each time God is repeated. What exactly is going on there? Okay. Anything else before we move on? Okay. All right. So before we talk about the question of descriptive words that don't resonate with our experiences, I want to talk a bit about the question that Ellen brought up, which is like, how do we ever describe God? Right? We have here a whole long list of descriptions of God. Some of them are more actions, so maybe that's a little easier to understand. But most of them are descriptive words. So how do we do that? So does someone want to read the quote from the source, the passage from the Babylonian Talmud, Megillah 25a? A certain person.
I'll read it if you like, Rachel.
Yeah, go ahead, Nancy.
You want me to read it?
Yeah.
Okay. A certain person went down to, Okay. A certain person went down to lead prayers before Rebbe Hanina. He said, the Lord, the great, the mighty, and the awesome, the powerful, the strong, and the valiant. Rebbe Hanina said to him.
So he adds just as after, right? He adds 3 descriptive words that are not in our Amidah, right? We just have the great, the mighty, and awesome. He adds the powerful, the strong, and the valiant. Okay.
Rabbi Hanina said to him, have you completed the praise of your master? Now, these 3 praises, if Moshe had not written them in the Torah, and the men of the great assembly had not established them, we could not say them. And you said all of these? It is like a man who has thousands upon thousands of coins of gold, and they praised him with 1,000 coins of silver. Is this not disrespectful of him?
So what's he saying? What's Rabbi Hanina saying? So Rabbi Hanina, this person who was leading the prayers added in these 3 extra adjectives, right? To what, and we see here that in the verse number 3, in the source number 3, right, that Moses himself uses the descriptions, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God, right here in Deuteronomy 10:17. And interestingly says, who shows no favor and takes no bribe, but upholds the cause of the fatherless and the widow and befriends the stranger, providing food and clothing. So that's just sort of a interesting point, that how does God show his greatness and mightiness and awesomeness is actually by helping the needy, the fatherless, the widow, the stranger. But okay, put that aside for now. So what's Rabbi Hanina's critique of him? What's he saying? He's like, why does he have a problem with what this Chazan did, the person who led prayers and added the 3 words? Does anyone understand? What is he asking here? What is he's saying?
He's sort of saying that it's futile to add praises because we will always fall short. That the only reason we use the initial 3 is because they're already in the Torah, so who can argue with that sort of, and to add something is what are we trying to prove? No,
Right,
how
because
can
there's
we
no end,
improve
there's
on
no
that?
end to, yeah, there's no end to
Yeah.
adding. Once we start adding, there's no way, like that line that we looked at in Suke de Zimra, no matter if I'm not remembering the exact words, but whatever, if our someone help me out, if our mouse were as, what is it in Shochenad?
Those were filled with song. If our
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no
eyes
matter
were,
what.
hands were swift, feet were as swift as deer. If our eyes were
Exactly.
whatever.
Right. Exactly. Right. We would never be able to finish praising God. So it's like, it's so impossible for us to describe God and his greatness that Moshe as if gave us a gift in these 3 words, right? He said, he gave us a gift in saying, these are 3 words that you can use to describe God, because otherwise, how would we even begin? It's such a difficult task. But once he gave them, like, that's it. Like that, he gave us a gift, and if we go over it, it's like there's no end. So just stick with the words, basically. In other words, it's like so hard to describe God, and we have this gift of like these set words to describe God, which can help us. Yeah, thanks, Susan. So that's one side, right? So from that perspective, it's almost a relief to have these descriptive words because it's so hard to describe God. And this way, we don't have to think of our own words for prayer, right? We don't have to think of our own way to approach God. We have these words that Moses gave us so many years ago to help us pray and approach God and describe God. But on the other hand, those words sometimes don't work for us, right? And what do we do? So that's the other hand. So that's this next source in Yoma 69b, and that's what we're gonna.
Rachel, I just had one other question, and I don't know
Yeah.
enough about the Hebrew grammar.
Mhm.
I mean, could it also be that in adding these 3 words to whatever Moses said, that was being disrespectful of Moses, and that no one could be as great as Moses? So like, leave well enough alone. Like, could
Interesting.
him refer to Moses as well as God in this instance?
That's a very interesting read, right? Meaning,
I mean, I don't know if the grammar
the
works.
metaphor, right? I mean, it's the grammar is this not disrespectful of him, right? It doesn't say who the him is. On the other hand, like the metaphor right before is like a man who has thousands of coins of gold, and they praised him with 1,000 coins of silver. So that him is clearly God. So I think so that would be like the reason to say that him is God, but maybe you could also read it that other way. We could also read that it goes back, that it's a gnai, it's a disrespect. Gnai is the word for disrespect that they use in the Gemara for Moses also. But then it's less. Then the metaphor is a little bit less relevant. The message of the metaphor, you know what I'm saying? If it's a disrespect to Moses, I mean, you could read it obviously as both. Also, it's disrespectful to both God and Moses. But the metaphor seems to be more about it being disrespectful to God. But I think there is something about it also being disrespectful to Moses for sure. Moses told us this is how he, like I said, gave us this gift to describe these words to describe God, and we going and using other words. Yeah, I think there is something about that also. Okay, yeah. So does someone want to read? So this is also from the Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, in Yoma 69b. Someone want to read this passage, starting from Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi?
I can read it.
Okay, go ahead.
For your God, Hashem, is God supreme and Lord supreme.
Wait, where are you?
The next one? Okay, sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, why were they called the members of the Great Assembly? It is because they returned the crown of the Holy One, blessed be he, to its former glory. Moses came and said, the great, the mighty, and awesome God.
Right, that's the quote we saw before.
Yeah. Jeremiah came and said, non-Jews are dancing in the temple. Where is God's awe? He did not say awesome. Daniel came and said, non-Jews are persecuting his children. Where is God's might? He did not say mighty.
Okay, so just hold for 1 second. I just want to show you where these sources here, right? We see in Jeremiah, right? It says, you shall you show kindness to the 1,000th generation, but visit the guilt of the parents upon their children after them. Speaking of Nancy's question, this is like that goes in the opposite direction, visiting the guilt of the parents upon their children. Oh, great and mighty God, right? So he says great and mighty, and he doesn't add in awesome, okay? And then Daniel says, I pray to the Hashem, my God, I'm supposed to say, making confession thus, O Lord, great and awesome God, who stays faithful to his covenant and those who love him and keep his commandments. So he takes this phrase and he takes out the mighty, okay? So they each, right, based on, for Jeremiah, he didn't think God was so awesome when non-Jews were dancing in the temple, and Daniel said non-Jews are persecuting his children. If God was so mighty, why isn't he doing anything about that? Okay, keep going, Mom.
Okay. They, the members of the great assembly, came and said, you should view it from the opposite direction. This is the might of God's might, where he conquers his desire by granting forgiveness to the evil ones. And this is the source of God's awe, were it not for the awesome nature of the Holy One. How could one tiny nation survive among all the nations? And the rabbis, i.e. Jeremiah and Daniel, how could they do this and uproot an ordinance instituted by Moses, the greatest teacher, who instituted the mention of these attributes in prayer? Rabbi Elazar said, they did so because they knew of the Holy One, blessed be he, that he is truthful. Consequently, they did not speak falsely about him.
Okay, so we have a debate here, right, between the members of the Great Assembly and the rabbis. I gotta call them rabbis, but the prophets, Jeremiah and Daniel, right? The members of the Great Assembly say we should stick with Moses's words, and Jeremiah and Daniel saying we should change them. So what is the arguments in either direction? What are the
wait, sorry,
yeah.
one question. We should or we can change them?
Interesting question. Very good question. It is.
I'm not familiar with this, so I really am asking. I really don't know.
No, it's a great question. Meaning they do change it.
Right.
It's almost like they're saying they
can or because they
right.
should.
Yeah, it's a good question. It seems, I don't know. I mean, they clearly think, it almost seems like they should, that they would say they should.
To me, it seems my instinct says it's deliberate for a reason. Now, I don't know what it is, but there's some reason they're using it that way. Obviously, they know what the prescription is. And if they're using it, in another formula, they must know or have a reason why. No,
exactly. Right. Exactly. And those are the reasons given in the beginning, right? That's why I almost want to say that it should, even though obviously this is all a interpretation, right? I don't know that this is actually was going on in Jeremiah and Daniel's heads, but right, they do have their reasons, so which almost does make it sound like should, right? So what are Jeremiah and Daniel's reasons? Why do they think that we should change the way that Moses describes God?
Probably because they didn't. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
They probably. No, I was just going to say that what he says at the end, he is truthful. They do not speak falsely about him. So if they didn't feel it, they're not going to say. Why should you say something you don't really feel?
Exactly. Right. In other words, I don't want to say something that I don't believe. Right. So therefore, I'm going to change the words, which is, obviously a very radical thing in the Jewish tradition. We don't normally change words of prayer. And of course, their changes didn't make it into our set prayers either. But, but at least in the Talmudic mind, right, this was a possibility, like they're changing the words because otherwise I feel like I'm lying, right? And God expects the truth from us. God is a truthful God, and he expects us to speak the truth to him. Sorry about that. Okay, and from the flip side, what are the members of the Great Assembly? What is their approach to prayer? What do we do if something doesn't seem to jive, if these words don't seem to jive with our personal experiences, what's their approach? Yeah, Ellen.
Are they changing the words of the prayer? Or are they beseeching God to for God's help, for God's assistance?
Yeah, they are not changing the words of the prayer, right? That's what Rabbi Shua and Levi saying at the beginning. They are called the members of the Great Assembly because they return the crown of the Holy One, blessed be, to its former glory. In other words, they explained how God can still be great, mighty, and awesome, despite the fact that non-Jews are dancing in the temple and non-Jews are persecuting God's children.
When bad things happen, sometimes we question how that jives with God being an all-powerful God,
Right.
but at the same time we call on God for help.
Mm-hmm. Right. Here, though, they don't, I mean, I think that's for sure, but here they don't even seem to be calling on God for help. They just say, well, you know what? God is really mighty. How is he mighty? Because even though he's not stopping these non-Jews from persecuting us, he's conquering his desire by granting forgiveness to the evil ones, which is fascinating. And you know what? God is really awesome. Even though non-Jews are dancing in the temple, we can still see that this one tiny nation survived among all the nations. And that's awesome. So what are they, like, what's their approach? What are they trying to do here? Like, what's their approach to prayer? And, you know, words that don't seem to resonate with our lived experience.
We seem to just come up with a different proof text for it, like some other event that would convince you that that was the case.
Yeah, exactly. And
it's like he said, she said. I'm using this example. It doesn't work. I'm going to use this other example. It does work. So I don't find either of them particularly convincing. Really.
Right. I mean, he conquers, his might is shown in holding back from punishing the evil people. I mean, that's very interesting.
God's picking God's battles.
Yeah. Or
I have a question. I have a question
for
everybody, actually. So when I pray, right, and I do a mixture of Hebrew, English, Portuguese, whatever, right? Like, but sometimes I'm like, okay, I get this. I connect to every word or to most of what's going on. And other times I'm like, what is going on? I have no idea, right? Like I don't know what this means, even though I did yesterday. So maybe in some way the words are there so that we inside ourselves, that's my take on it. And I'm asking what other people's opinions are, so that we can actually reach that, you know, be able to get from A to point B, right? Or from whatever it is when you finish praying, or when you finish a sentence or a word. The words are there to help you. And now that doesn't, you know, if I sometimes I do stop if I'm not feeling it, and I say, like, just please help me, and I continue, and that does help me. So I don't know if that's, you know, if that's because we are supposed to get to that level to the words and connect to them, right? And today it's probably harder than it was when our forefathers did it. So you know, when it was prescribed. So I'm asking you and everybody, what is your experience?
So in other words, you're saying that some days you're able to connect more, some days you're able to connect less, but you see that words is sort of like a challenge of, like, you know, reaching the ideal of being able to connect to them.
Think of it this way. Like, let's say you're Beyonce or some singer or something, and you have a concert. Okay. And so your concert is going to go great because you know, you danced, you connected to all the lyrics, boom. And other days you're like, you know what? I have laundry, I have this, so whatever's going on. And then, you know, you just say the words, but you don't really give that performance that Beyonce gives.
Right.
It's that's how I see it. I see, like, I'm giving I'm like, especially in the, when you're, I don't know how to say it in English because I know it in Portuguese, but there's when you say the ashrei and all of that, that you're basically, I think of it as a performance to Hashem, so that I can connect to that, tap into that energy, into that spiritual, energy of Hashem. Obviously, it's always there, but I can tap more or less.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying resonates with me in the sense that, like, we say these same words. Like, a lot of people say, there's a classic question, like, why don't we just pray when we feel it and use our own words and just pray when we're spontaneously moved to pray, right? But no, Judaism says we're given these words and we have to pray each day at certain times. And the hope is that if we do this practice, then it is an opportunity. Each time we say these words, it's an opportunity for connection. And sometimes we aren't able to totally take advantage of that opportunity. And sometimes we are more, but if we didn't have this like regular practice, then there would be even fewer times that we're able to connect, right? Like, it's like training ourselves to, Nancy.
I was just gonna say, I took a class once and we talked about some of this, and something that was said by the instructor, which I don't remember who it was, kind of resonated with me to this day. But the prayer itself, the words really don't have to resonate at all with you, and it could almost be meaningless. But the beauty of prayer, the specific, out of the Siddur, is that these are prayers, that for 2,000 years, or how many years, thousands of years, for a long time, we've all been saying the same thing, which keeps us united as a people. And it's just the beauty of being able to make that connection, to stand there and say the same words that have been said for generations by Jewish. And I personally, for me, I find that really powerful.
For sure.
And more so than the actual meaning of the words themselves.
Yeah, for sure. And not only the generations, but also Jews all over the world that you can.
Exactly. Everybody.
Look,
Yes.
I'm gonna share very quickly. So my family's from Darmstadt, where I'm not sure if anybody's familiar. Kristallnacht happened in Darmstadt, Germany. And long story short, I had to go there. The city of Darmstadt paid for me to go because my grandfather has a synagogue after his name. But anyways, long story short, because he went back from Brazil to Germany to be a judge of war. That's why. But it was I kind of understand German a bit, but the beauty of it was when they prayed, even though it is like not an Orthodox synagogue, it's like, I don't know what exactly it is. I don't know how to classify it, but it's something. The prayer, I was like, oh, they prayed the same thing. It was very, very powerful.
Yeah.
Sure. I was with my 88-year-old uncle, who's the oldest member of my family, and he was there, and he was praying, when he's not religious at all, but he was praying in Hebrew.
Knew the words, right?
And he knew the words.
It's an amazing, beautiful thing. And you're right, for that, you don't have to find always find meaning. Just the fact that we say them over and over again and been saying them for generations, and all Jews all over the world, that's meaning in of itself, for sure. It's a great point. At the same time, I also like to find meaning in them as well when possible. But it is a good thing to keep in mind, when we can't connect to particular words, there's still a power in saying them, regardless. What I think the members of the Great Assembly are doing is that they're trying to find a way. I don't think that they would necessarily agree with Daniel and Jeremiah, but they're trying to find a way to reinterpret the words so that they're true for them, which maybe is often a very difficult thing to do. Like my mom said, she wasn't so satisfied with the way they did it. It was a little bit of a stretch, maybe. Though on the other hand, it is awesome that this one tiny nation survives among all the nations, meaning that's pretty awesome. It's not like there is truth in their explanations as well. I don't think they're it's just a stretch. So in order for them to be able to maintain the meaning of the words, I think it is a sincere effort, which
Or maybe
Okay,
it's saying that each person will come up with their own examples, and that's okay. So for
yeah,
them, these are the
exactly.
things they found awesome, but somebody else might have some other awesome experience or
For sure. Right. We can take
God's
these,
strength or
yeah, we can take these like general descriptions and bring our own concrete, own examples, experiences, and each person will do that in different ways. Yeah, we'll talk about that also more, how we sort of take the different, there's a lot in the Jewish tradition and the Jewish prayer tradition, there's a lot of different things like that we can choose to connect to and to bring our experiences to, and each person brings different experiences, basically brings different examples. So there were a few sources that fit in here that I wanted to get to at the end of last class, but they're relevant here. Basically, at the end of last class, what I wanted to do, we didn't have a chance to do. Last class, we were talking at the end of class about the king servant metaphor. And like Ellen, this is like a difficult metaphor for me to connect to. And I think a lot of people in today's day and age, there are some people who easily connected to it, but a lot of people, I think it's a challenge. We don't have kings so much, and we don't live in as much of a hierarchical world. But so I just wanted to look at a few sources, trying to, in the spirit of the members of the Great Assembly, trying to take this description of king, which in our day and age is hard to connect to for many of us, and sort of reinterpret it or connect to it, bring our personal experiences in a way that we can connect to it. So Rabbi Fox, the Rosh Yeshiva at Maharat, had an interesting thing that I just wanted to start off with. He said, I believe that we are living in a generation that wants the lover beloved imagery, right? Which we also, by the way, see in this paragraph, right? We see both of them in this paragraph. Like if you go back, right? We see for the sake of his name with love, like we talk about God acting towards us with love. So we do see the lover imagery, and we also see the king imagery, right? We see both. So Rabbi Fox says, right, I believe that we're living in a generation that wants the lover beloved imagery, but still needs the king servant reminder, right? Like we want to think that we can always just talk about God as our lover, and that's like an easier image to connect to. But the king servant reminder is still doing something for us, is still helpful in some way. And he talks about a lot of different things. But one thing he says is halacha rests on the foundation of a divine commander and human beings who are commanded. So in other words, like a lot of Judaism is about God as commander and human beings as commanded. And this image reminds us of that, right? Like if you're a lover-beloved, if you're a lover-beloved relationship, then you lose that aspect of God as commander. Normally, yeah, we like to think in our love relationships that we don't have that as much. So I wanted
Rachel?
yeah, Nancy, go
I was
ahead.
gonna say, also always reminds me of a parent-child relationship, which in some ways we have with God too. I mean, we love, but we still have to parent and still have to, set boundaries and rules, and God
Right,
is
so
our Father.
Right, the parent is maybe a little easier to understand, right? Like then God can
Yeah.
command us, like we do give our kids rules, boundaries, orders even. We try not to make them seem like orders, but they really are in many ways, especially the younger the kids are.
And we always say that we do it because we love you so much, right?
Exactly, but with love, right? So the parent is a nice way of combining the two elements of the loving but also the authority, that there is an authority structure here, right? It's not a yeah, and I wanted to like quickly look at these two, Yeshaya Leibowitz and Ravari ben David. Someone want to read the Yeshaya Leibowitz? So we saw a different quote of Yeshaya Leibowitz earlier in this class, which was very much along this similar lines. And this again is like explaining how does he get meaning out of this idea of God being king in this day and age. Someone want to read it? Yeshaya Leibowitz, The Only Meaning of Prayer?
I can. The only meaning of prayer as a religious institution is service of God by man who accepts the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. The greatness and power of prayer, the legally mandated, fixed and obligatory prayer, is the rejection of man of all personal interests and motives in favor of the awareness of standing before God, a posture which is identical to all people in all conditions and in all circumstances, and is not dependent on one's personal history or what has occurred to him. The extinction of a person's will in favor of the obligation to serve God. I'm gonna have to mute here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so in other words, the meaning of prayer is that we're serving God. We are saying our personal interests and motives are not as important as what God tells us to do, basically. And that in so doing, we're identical to all people in all places, and it doesn't really matter what our personal history is or anything else. So this is classic Yeshaya, but we've seen it before, which also could be hard for a lot of people to connect to. But Rav Aryeh ben David, who we also saw earlier, so Rav Aryeh ben David, remember, likes to take the different metaphors for God and say, we can learn if we see God as our lover, that can help us be better lovers in our interpersonal relationships, right? So he wants to say, if we see God as king or as master servant, either way, then that can help us also in our interpersonal relationships. How so? Does someone want to read a Rav Aryeh ben David? As you learn to reject.
I will if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
As you learn to reject or minimize personal interest and motives in prayer, you will also learn to minimize personal interest and motives in your relationships. Social structures supersede personal needs. The demands of family, community, and nation presume preeminence in life. Personal needs are subjected to the greater good of the larger group. This approach to God and human relationships focuses on your level of dependability and loyalty. Your own moods, needs, and desires are not central.
Right. So in other words, this metaphor of our relationship with God helps us develop this part of our interpersonal relationship, this aspect where, sometimes we do need to give up our personal needs in order to, care for our family or help out our community or help out our nation. I mean, now in Israel, we're seeing this all the time, obviously, the soldiers who are getting up, leaving their wives and kids and going and fighting, or the mothers who are leaving their kids also. I have a friend, my friend, both she and her husband are in the army right now, and they have 3 little kids. But, even on just in so many times that we need to care for our family, and even if we want to do something, we still have to care for our family instead, or so that this metaphor of seeing God as the master and us as a servant helps us to develop this aspect in our own lives of being able to at times set aside our personal needs and desires to help out our family, community, nation. Yeah, questions, responses. Does this help anybody in connecting to the king servant, master servant metaphor for God? Anyone convinced, not convinced? Yeah.
I was wondering if we could, harken back to some of the stuff we discussed at the beginning, where we said, are we praying to the God of Abraham, etc., or are we praying to our God? And is there a difference? Is there a tension between the two?
Right.
And part of this, discussing this, the last few paragraphs here, which are pretty strong. If I can rephrase, when I'm praying, there's sort of 2 issues going on for me. One is concentration,
Right.
to actually be in the moment of prayer or not, I love the skit from a few years ago where, you know, everybody's got their cell phones going off during daily minyan, you know, I mean, that's a real, you know, it was done in a funny way, but it shows how difficult it is to concentrate, to center on prayer or anything else, right? Life in general. But also there's the other level of, are we comfortable with the words of the prayer, of the tefillah? And, you know, how do we understand it? And do we understand it in a way that is given to us? Or, you know, to me, it's sort of you know, it's a two-way street that, you know, if you simply have, there's something out there and you have to find it, I don't know where the room is for the person in that. So it's sort of a two-way street, that you find something where that's both given to you and that you can approach.
Right. Well, I mean, I think going back to the first paragraph, right? I didn't bring a source, but some people talk about, right? He is our God and God of our fathers, God of Abraham, God of Isaac. In other words, that we have to both make God our God and see God through the lens of Jewish history, the Jewish people, you know, that's always the challenge. And also what you said now also reminded me back to that source of Rabbi Fox that I brought, I don't remember which class, but about, it was about Psukei de Zimra teaching us how to be present. And that if we can learn how to be present in prayer, then maybe we can also bring that skill of being present to other aspects of our lives, to like sit and listen to someone and actually focus on them and not be looking at our phones or, you know, whatever, but actually just sit and listen and focus. Like that's, an important skill, which isn't necessarily dependent on the words. You can be sort of focused on being in the experience of prayer with or without the words being crucial, you know, like you could focus on the words or you could focus more on the experience as a whole, you know. Okay, a little bit longer. Okay, so coming back again to this, this question of connecting to the words in the different parts of tefillah. So Rabbi Leo Dessler from the last century talks about this phrase. Now we're going back to the beginning of the paragraph: God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob. Since my dad's words were a good segue. If someone want to read it, or I'll just read this and then maybe someone else can read that. Okay, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob. The word Elokai, God of, is repeated for each of the forefathers, right? Like I talked about, it could have been just God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but instead it says God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob. Why? Because each one of them worshipped God with their own unique characteristics. In other words, each Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob also each brought their own unique ways of prayer, you know, their own unique experiences into prayer, and they had their own unique ways of praying. And we, as the way I see it, is like we as their descendants, right? We as the Jewish people thousands of years later have many different models within the tradition to choose from. Like another way that we can sort of deal with this question of how do we connect to the words of prayer. It's like maybe on some days I connect to this word of prayer, and on some days this word of prayer doesn't seem at all, you know, resonant or even true. But some other part of prayer does, right? So I think like the way I look at Rabbi Dessler is he's saying, you know, we have these different models in our tradition. We'll look a little bit at what the different models are. We have a few minutes. And these models can like help us depending on sort of where we are in life, right? And a different model might be more resonant at different times. So just to think a little bit, start to think, we're not going to get too much into this, but what are those different models? I'm just going to keep reading because we have 5 minutes. So Genesis Rabbah talks about the different models of what are the different ways of praying. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, the early patriarchs instituted 3 prayers, right? So according to this, we have a question. Why do we have the morning prayer, the afternoon prayer, and the evening prayer? Each one is for one patriarch. One is for Abraham, one is for Isaac, and one is for Jacob, according to one interpretation. Okay, so the early patriarchs instituted 3 prayers. Abraham instituted the morning prayer, as it is stated. Abraham arose early in the morning to go to the place where he stood. And standing is nothing other than prayer. As it is stated, Pinchas stood and prayed. So Abraham's model is a standing model, and that's the morning model, right? And interestingly, so he's standing before God. Interestingly, this quote, if you see in Genesis 19:27-28, is in the context of Sodom and Amorah, right? And he hurried to the place where he had stood before God. So what is it talking about where he had stood before God? When he argued with God about saving the cities of Sodom and Amorah. So this is like a standing in prayer that is very almost argumentative, right? It's like also definitely seeing God as a partner. Okay. Right, that Abraham has to say. And we see that also, right? That God says in the beginning of the story, like, I'm gonna tell Abraham because he should know about this. Like, he's my partner in some ways, before he destroys Sodom and Amorah. Okay. Isaac instituted the afternoon prayer. As it is stated, Isaac went out to converse, lasuach, in the field toward evening. And sicha, conversation, is nothing other than prayer. As it is stated, I will pour out my complaint, sichi, before him. But sichi is also like more like they're translating here as complaint, but sicha, like in modern Hebrew, is like conversation. So for Isaac, prayer is more like a conversation. He's sharing this state, and this quote is in the story. He's about to meet Rebecca. He's going out to the field, and he looks up and he sees Rebecca. And Rebecca sees him. So it also makes sense in this like conversation, sharing, like you might share with your loved one, right? Because it's in the context of his relationship. He's having this sharing conversation with God, which then sort of leads into his meeting Rebecca. Jacob instituted the evening prayer, as it is stated. He encountered Vayifga, the place. And Pgi'ah, encounter, is nothing other than prayer. As it is stated, you do not raise a cry or a prayer on their behalf, and do not plead with Tifga me. Likewise, it says, if they are prophets and the word of the Lord is with them, please let them plead Yifga'u with the Lord of hosts. So Jacob in the evening, so this quote, again, you can look at all these things afterwards, but this quote is Jacob is running away from Beersheba right after he steals the blessing from Esau, and he's scared and he's running away for his life. And he is pogea. They translate as encounter, but pogea has almost like it can be like almost violent, sort of in some way, like or like hurtful, even like encountered a certain place, like it's a hard word, and he's hard. He's in a stuck place, right? He just had to leave his home, and he doesn't really know what's going on. And this is when he has his dream, and that's a very also typical of the night. So these are 3 very different ways of praying, right? That we have these different models within our tradition. We have standing before God, like sort of arguing with God, demanding God help us and do justice. We have sicha, like sharing with God what's going on, and pogea, which is like pleading with God, right? We're in a stuck place, and we turn to God. So just to wrap up, someone want to read it, since I've just read a lot? Someone want to read Rabbi Dov Zinger? It's a bit of a lot, but we'll end with this. Abraham rises in the morning. Anyone?
One moment. Let me just get that bigger. Abraham rises in the morning at the day's dawn with its cleanliness and stands. He stands up for himself. He has what to say. He does not back down, does not give up, does not only prostrate before God and exalt. He wants to be a partner. The Hebrew word PL is connected to the word lehitpalel, to pray, and also means to appeal in court. So Abraham appeals. There's a trial taking place. He has a case and a judgment. He does not give in, he demands. Trying to rescue, he argues. With courage, resolve, he stands. Isaac goes out to converse in the field. I can scroll.
Sorry. Yeah.
In a prayer that holds within it the gentleness of the field, the connection to the natural flow, the continuing conversation of nature and the world. As evening falls, as the sun sets, nature is at its most beautiful. Painted in colors of yearning, Isaac is in deep conversation, speaking heart to heart. He pours out his speech before the Lord, without effort, without force, without judgment. This simple sharing becomes the raw material of the connection with God. The commonplace and the mundane are transformed into the infinite, and there is one who hears an answer.
Into the infinite, yeah.
There is an echo, a conversation. In just a moment, Isaac will meet Rebecca. The conversations in the field is also the opening of the heart to relationship, to the words and the connections that form it. Jacob flees alone at night. In a time of despair, of doubt, he doesn't see how to go forward. He collides with the place, stuck. Being stuck, this impasse transforms into prayer. Yaakov is stuck in place and discovers that this is the place that is the place of the world. The wall that he's hit becomes the wailing wall. The collusion becomes connection. When we hit a wall and cannot move forward, we have no choice but to turn our eyes upward, and then suddenly our field of vision expands. Everything becomes possible. The limit becomes limitless. The surrounding darkness transforms into countless stars shining in the sky.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a bit long. But thanks for getting through it. So I think just to wrap up, this is saying we have lots of different models for prayer, and different parts of prayer and different words of prayer bring up different experiences, and we have a lot to choose from. And sometimes we might feel more like Abraham, and sometimes we might feel more like Isaac, and sometimes we might of the prayer based on those experiences. But I bless us that we should, find the ways of connecting to different parts of prayer, depending, based on where we're at that moment. So thank you. Sorry, I went over a few minutes.
That's all right. Just to close things out, I want to let people know about some upcoming classes and also make a schedule note. Class will not meet as normally scheduled next week. This class will not meet on December 6th. We will return for the last session the following week. So, we'll miss you next week, but we'll see you again. And I want to highlight some.
Right. And the following week will be the last class also. 2 weeks from now, it's our last class.
Yes, 2 weeks from now.
And we will be talking about the requests section of the Amidah, doing when we ask God for things. So.
And I just want to highlight 2 classes at Risha. Starting tonight at 8 p.m. is Technologies of Transmission with Rabbanit Sarah Wolkenfeld. You can find out more at 5784.risha.org/fall. Our annual Bohm Memorial Lecture is coming up as well on this Sunday, 7 p.m. Eastern, and I will post the link in the chat. And thank you to Rachael for the question. The lineup for classes for next spring has not yet been released, so I don't know yet whether there will be classes on tefillah, but please keep an eye out, and because there may well be more. Thank you, everyone.